Hey everyone, Curse Deck Builder here, making our way to 10,000 decks assisted. And here we have Selenia, Dark Angel, I'm going to say Life Total Control. This deck comes to us as a donation deck from Shirok. Shirok, thank you so much for supporting the channel. This deck has a bit of a primer, which I will read for their notes. Let's go into there. It seems to be, I'm not going to go through the whole thing, but it seems to be, this is an extension of their, one of their favorite commander decks that they always play and always update. And the goal of the deck is life manipulation, changing your life total, changing your opponent's life total, and then using either life transfer or life exchange effects in order to trade your life total for someone else or pull other wins that way. Now, there wasn't a direct question about, what they wanted me to do, so we're going to do a kind of a general look at the deck, see what stands out and what stands in, I guess. But before we get there, as always, if you'd like to submit your own deck to me so I can make a video about it, there is a link in the video description down below. And if you'd like your deck to be the next deck I make a video on, there's a link for that as well. Over the last few weeks, I've gotten a lot of donation decks, which I'm very, very happy to see. But it has created a situation where we're just going through donation decks and not breaking through the main list. So maybe I'll find a solution to that in the future. Perhaps if I am making, let's say, 2 videos, one of them will be donation and one of them will be not donation, so that people on the main list don't feel like they're waiting too long. We'll see. I don't know. I have some time coming up that I'll be giving some thought to the channel, so that'll be on the list. Finally, if you'd like to take a look at this deck list yourself, or read the primer that Shirok has left on the deck list, the link is in the video description below. Now, let's take a look at our commander and see why they are the head of our, life total control deck. Selenia Dark Angel is a 5-mana black-white angel. She's a 3/3 flyer with 1 ability. Pay 2 life, return her to your hand. Well, to its owner's hand, to her owner's hand. Now, the whole reason this is here, though, I think mechanically the idea was this used to be a Sarah's Angel that was very, very difficult to destroy, because whenever she'd be targeted, you just return her to your hand. However, that's not exactly why she's being used here. In fact, the main reason she's being used here is that this pay 2 life is actually an infinite ability, right? You can activate it as many times as you want. She's only going back to your hand once, but you can keep activating it and reduce your life total down in packets of 2. There's a few other cards in the deck that do this, and I'm going to introduce one more, but this is the main reason we're using this commander. There's no Angel Tribal, there's no, bounce your own commander tribal. It is just an outlet to get your life total low, which is important to note because she is rather a high amount of mana, and that's the main reason we're going to be using her. So without further ado, let's take a look at the deck list itself. And honestly, this is very reminiscent to me as one of the earlier decks I used to build. It has a lot of the cards I used to play with a lot. A lot of these cards are still strong, don't get me wrong, and it seems to be updated in choice areas with key cards such as, Toxic Deluge, Necropotence, these kind of very, very strong cards to kind of power up a strategy that is, how do I put this, a bit older. Like it is, and it is noticeable this is a deck that Shirok has had for a while, because these are cards that used to be a lot more popular. Once again, this is not a mark on, strength of the deck or effectiveness of the deck. This is just something that I noticed right away. In addition, for a deck like this, strength is very, pliable, depending on how you want to win the game, considering we have things such as Felidar Sovereign, that can instantly win the game if you have 40 or more life. Cards like this allow us to kind of gauge the strength of the deck back and forth. And in addition, you know, we've got Enlightened Tutor, Vampiric Tutor. These cards raise the overall power level of the deck, so we have quite a direction to go into. And for that reason, I'm not going to mess with the power level too much. Instead, what I'm going to attack a little bit is the other metric I use to measure commander decks, which is successfulness. What is the deck's ability to do what it wants to do? And here, I'm going to hone on to one of the main things that I think we need to work on. And by going to the curve, you might be able to see it yourself as well. Our curve is very, very chunky right between at 5 mana. There is a lot of 5 mana cards. This isn't what we would call a curve as much as maybe a pulse. Goes up, down, up, down. And I think this is the biggest, concern I have with the deck. We have a total of 13 if you don't count the commander, 5 mana cards. And then the second lowest one is 3 mana, which we have 14 cards, and after that is 4 mana, which is 12 cards. Now, viewers may have heard me say this before, but something that's really relevant about these 3 numbers is there's no way to mix and match them, right? If our 3 highest number, like mana costs, are 1, 2, and 3, there's that added bonus that if you have a 1 mana card and a 2 mana card, it adds up to that 3rd mana card. So, you can play 2 of these cards really easily, even within its own curve, right? Whereas if we look at the 3 mana card, in order to play 2 3 mana cards, we need 6 mana. In order to play a 3 mana and a 4 mana card, we need 7 mana, etc., right? These 5 and 3 are our highest chances of playing cards, which means, if we wanted to cast both, 8 mana is actually the goal we're going for. Or much more realistically, if we want to cast, I realize now they have the same mana cost, right? Actually, 3 is just 1 more. Huh, interesting. I looked at it wrong. So there's actually 3 mana is the highest one, with 5 with 1 card below. I'm still gonna attack this, but my numbers were off by 1. However, with 14 3 mana spells, we need 6 mana to cast 2 of them. So all this to say, the main target I want to attack is I want to reduce the mana curve of the deck. I especially want to attack the 5 mana stuff, but a few of the 4 mana stuff, and let's see what else we can grab. The fact that 3 mana is the highest isn't ideal, and we'll try to address a few of these cards, but there's really only so much we can do, and we're going to focus more on the higher cost cards. Last thing I want to note while looking at the curve is, as you may have noticed, Selenia, our commander, is also 5 mana. But as I mentioned before, Selenia is like an activated ability outlet and not necessarily like a game plan piece. So her being 5 mana is actually not that big of a problem. All right. So what I'm going to do is, instead of going through the mana curve, I'm going to go through the deck list above. And I'm going to go backwards on each CMC, and I'm going to try to point out cards that I think not only can we replace or don't do what they don't do as much as we'd like them to, or they don't work with the main plan of the deck, or I'd like to point out, ones that are just weaker than the rest, that if I was going to cut one, I'd have to cut that one. So starting with enchantments, this is the place I have the least problems with. I think the enchantments are really great. I think we look at Axis of Mortality. A lot of these life exchange cards are very high mana by nature. So because of that, I'm not going to address them too much. I would say overall, it would be probably fine to cut down. Let's see how many we have. We have Axis of Mortality, that's 1. Soul Conduit, that's 2. Reverse the Sands, that's 3. Repay in Kind, that's 4. Is that the last one? Magus of the Mirror is where we have 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah. So we have 5 of these effects. And I would argue that 5, this is the general point I'm going to make, is that 5 is probably a bit too many. You have Vampiric Tutor, you have Enlightened Tutor to grab access. And so I wouldn't mind going down a few. I believe Enlightened Tutor, is it Artifact or Enchantment? Yeah, so that can also grab Soul Conduit. So with that in mind, the two that immediately come to mind is Soul Conduit and Axis of Mortality. The Repay in Kind is also very strong because it hits all your opponents, and I do really, really like that. But I think there's just a few too many of these effects, especially when we consider that Reverse the Sands is 8 mana, and Magus of the Mirror is 6 mana and a whole untapped step. So those are the ones that I don't like the most. They're kind of like the fun of the deck, so I don't want to pick on them too much, but I really do think we could cut down. We are playing Demonic Tutor, we're playing Vampiric Tutor, we're playing Enlightened Tutor. These cards are here to grab us those cards, so we need less copies of them. The only other card in enchantments that kind of catches my eye is Near Death Experience, which wins you the game on upkeep with 1 life. I find this card to be very equivalent to Felidar Sovereign, albeit just a little more difficult to trigger. I personally do not like these kinds of cards. I find that they are either incredibly powerful or incredibly weak. They're very, very polarizing in a play group. And for that reason, I often don't like them because they'll never quite do what I want them to do. Oftentimes, either I am casting them and the whole group scoops, which is fine, at least we get to play again, or I'm casting that, everyone's looking at me and going, okay, either they have removal or they have a lightning bolt, right? Like, especially for Near Death Experience, which is very lightning boltable. I do like Near Death a lot more because it's less mana, there's more of a risk reward, it's a lot more fun. So I do like Near Death more than Felidar Sovereign, and I think they're both, you can keep them both, it's not a problem, but it's the kind of card that I personally don't like, and I just wanted to note that if you're finding that the play group just doesn't mesh with the card, unfortunately, usually that just means taking it out. The rest is good. Sunbond, I believe, is the weakest enchantment otherwise. I do believe that you don't, like, what I like about this card is it gains life in a chunk, right? Like for each point of life you get that many +1/+1 counters. So it's really, really good with Children of Korlis. So I don't dislike it, but the fact we got to attach this to a creature is the rough part. If this was like, you know, an enchantment instead of an aura, well, I guess an enchantment that's not an aura, I would like it a lot more, but it's what we have to work with. And unfortunately, sometimes you're going to be blown out, and that's fine. All right, going to artifacts. This one I have a few more points. This is a little on the lower of the mana cost, so I'll go quickly. Whip of Erebros feels kind of antithetical? Man, I can't pronounce that word. It seems against the game plan of your deck. Like, creatures you control have lifelink. Once you play Death's Shadow, you're going to feel really, really bad about it. I do appreciate the fact that you can use this to reanimate some of your creatures for the turn, but I think it's kind of clunky here. A lot of your work is going to be setting your life total to a very specific amount, and Whip of Erebros kind of really messes with that math. There's just going to be situations where, like, don't get me wrong, in a regular deck, this amount of life gain is just really, really good, but here, it feels like there's just going to be situations where it de-incentivizes you to attack with certain creatures or block with certain creatures because your life total goes a little out of your control when you use it. And that kind of feels bad, especially when you need to be making certain attacks in order to stay in the game. So I don't hate it, but I think it's a clunkier card than it appears. Likewise, our 4-mana artifacts and our 3-mana artifacts mostly stick out to me for being weaker. Both Pristine Talisman and Chromatic Lantern are 3 mana, which is a lot of mana for a mana rock. I'll have better suggestions for them, so I would suggest taking them out. Worn Power Stone is okay here because we're trying to ramp, but even then, as we lower the curve, Worn Power Stone is going to feel a little worse, but I don't dislike it. Tapping for 2 is really, really strong. It's another Soul Ring effect. Aetherflux Reservoir is great. Phyrexian Processor is a card I have a hard time with because it's vulnerable to so many different types of removal, but in a deck like this, it's very, very strong. The only thing is I wish you can, like, I hope you can play it on the turn that you have 8 mana, so you can activate it right away. Otherwise, it feels like a bit of a liability to play this card and, you know, immediately start, like, I have to wait a turn to play your minion. That being said, something that I think is worth considering that I think a lot of players miss is that Phyrexian Processor is still a good card when you pay 8 life, right? I think there's this idea that we need to pay 12 to 20 life in order for this card to be good. But honestly, 4 mana for an 8/8 every turn is not a bad deal. Is it the strongest version of this card? No, but I think it's fine to be using... Actually, sorry, I should make this card centered. It's the strongest version. It's not the strongest version of the card, but it's a pretty strong thing you can do turn by turn, and it's a pretty good mana sink late game as you are, you know, drawing cards. So I do like this here. On the other hand, Thran Dynamo is just a bit too far onto the ramp package. This is really good for decks that want to hit 7 or 8 reliably, and instead of doing that to hit your 8 and 7 mana spells, I think you should just consider them to be finishers and not worry so much of immediately ramping into them. Now, the nice thing about this, I will say, is it does solve the problem I brought up earlier of going from 4 to 7, which allows you to play a 3 and a 5 with a land drop or a 3 and a 4. But otherwise, it doesn't do that much, and it's just a lot of mana to put out. So I'm not the biggest fan of it. I'm going to put this on something that doesn't really catch my attention. Finally, Vidalcan Orrery is a card I don't think is good here. You don't have a lot of plays that really dramatically change the game outside of board clears. And Vidalcan Orrery is a lot more powerful when you are playing multiple lower mana spells. Think about it that way. The threat of the Orrery is that at any point on your opponent's turns, you have interaction. And if you burn through all of your interaction to play, or all of your mana, I should say, to play Crested Sunmare, like, giving this creature flash isn't that good, really, right? We don't play Commander in the way that we used to, where everyone sits there and, you know, just drops bombs. People hold up removal to an extent, and the difference and the power level of that removal has gone up so high. You know, people like you are playing Swords to Plowshares, Path to Exile, you know, 1 mana removal. So the idea of, like, I'm gonna flash in like Crested Sunmare at the end of the turn so that I can untap and attack with it is not really that viable anymore, because someone will be like, oh, I've been holding up 1 extra white mana to deal with a situation just like this. It didn't matter if it was on your turn or your opponent's turn. This is an ideal target to be Swords to Plowshared, right? So Vidalcan Orrery loses a lot of power with the bombs, but if you could cast, like, you know, a creature here, a creature there, and hold up removal at the same time, it looks really good. And that's just not the kind of deck this is, and to me, Vidalcan Orrery is just 4 mana to, you know, drain the deck of resources, honestly, and heighten the mana curve. So I would very much so recommend taking it out. All right, let's move to instants and sorceries. I've really talked already about the Reverse and Sands, so I'm just going to skip to sorceries and say I like all of it except for Ambition's Cost and Final Strike. I will have 2 suggestions for these cards out in the when I'm giving you suggestions, so I won't go into them too much here now, but all that's worth considering is these cards are 4 mana when they could easily be 2 mana or 3 mana. So this ability is just very expensive, so we're going to try to reduce the mana cost on it. That's just the ability is good on both of these cards. It's just a little too much mana. Essence Harvest is close, but I think 3 mana, like, I'm already going to give a suggestion of this card that's 2 mana, so we're already in a good position. 3 mana is fine, I think, so we'll leave that. Going to instants, I generally like most of these. Mortify and Utter End are just a little too expensive these days. I'll have a suggestion for one of them. I think you can keep Mortify, or you can make it into a Vindicate. Actually, you know what it should be? And I'll just put it here so when we get to it, I will bring it up. It should be Stroke of Midnight. Because Mortify, you know, you can use a card that hits everything instead of Mortify just hitting creatures or enchantments. Really clean exchange, so we'll do that. And then if we wanted another one, I'll also write out Generous Gift. So we'll look at those when we come to additions. All right, Ad Nauseam and Hatred. Hatred's great. I have no problem with Hatred. Hatred's definitely the finisher this deck loves to use, so I think this is fantastic. And as always, Hatred is great when it's not even your creature. I think it is underestimated the ability to cast Hatred on your opponent's creatures, turning a regular attack into lethal. And so I do very much so like that. It is a lot of mana, but it's 5 mana to sometimes win the game, so I have no problem with that. Ad Nauseam, however, exists in a very strange place in this deck. Now, I really, really like Ad Nauseam. In fact, something I should have said at the offset is that I don't know if you've seen my Eiley deck, because my Eiley deck is a much lower to the ground life total deck, a deck that cares about life totals and interacting with losing life. So it might be beneficiary to take a look at that for some ideas. And there, I really do recommend Ad Nauseam. But here, I'm having a much harder time recommending it, mainly because, and you guessed it, it's the mana curve, right? Where we have so many 5-drops that as an Ad Nauseam is going to take chunks out of your life, like 5 health chunks. And that's just going to prevent you from being able to draw enough cards for Ad Nauseam to be worthwhile. And what I'll do is I'll actually make the suggestion now, because I don't know how much I want to make this into a suggestion, but Midnight Bargain, is it? Am I thinking? No, it's Moonlight Bargain. If you want this ability, I recommend Moonlight Bargain. Just because this doesn't care about the converted mana cost. Moonlight Bargain is 5 mana, look at the top 5 cards, and for each card, you pay 2 life or you put it into your graveyard. This is a really, really good card that I think is underappreciated because it does 2 very relevant things. 1, it puts cards into your graveyard, and 2, it puts cards into your hand. And paying 2 per card is really rather reasonable. Think about it this way. Moonlight Bargain will put 5 cards into your hand, guaranteed for 10 life. Ad Nauseam in your deck will sometimes put 3 cards for 10 life, maybe even less cards, right? Like 2 cards. You could flip 2 5s, or you could flip like a 6 and a 7 really, really easily, right? We do have lower cost cards, but 5, 4, and 3 are just really high, so the odds of drawing into many cards are rather low. So we are trying to reduce the overall converted mana cost, but if we can't get it down, or if you don't want to bring it down that much, I would recommend Moonlight Bargain, but right now I think it's a little too dangerous to use Ad Nauseam. And don't get me wrong, I do understand its like usefulness, especially with Children of Korlis, where you can, pay out your entire life, use Children of Korlis, then use Ad Nauseam. You don't have right now, but we'll talk about it when we see Children of Korlis, where you can, if you can reanimate it, you'll be really happy to get its ability triggers again. We'll get to that, but in the meantime, I just think it's just not in the cards right now to take advantage of Ad Nauseam without, burning yourself out or not being able to draw enough cards. Sorry, I was looking at Conqueror's Flail. I thought this was the other one. Yeah, this is fine. I thought this card was something else for a second and I confused myself. Okay, let's look at the last part, creatures. And this is where we have the most high mana cards. And I think we're gonna have to be a little, there's a few here that don't really work with the theme in my opinion. So let's take a look at those. So Sublime Archangel really sticks out to me. The whole point of Sublime Archangel is that you are going wide. Exalted and each creature gains Exalted is really, really strong when you have a board of, 30 creatures, and a creature gets +30/+30, and it's unblockable to begin with, and you take out a player. This is not that deck. You can't really create an army. I don't know how many token generators you have. I think it's just the one. Actually, let's look down here. Tokens, 3. Horse, Merit Lodge, Minion. Yeah, okay. So our... I didn't even realize you were playing Dark Depths. And Vesuva, which is nice. But our setup for you know, going wide for Sublime Archangel, it's just kind of non-existent. I don't really think this is where you want to be. It's just not going to do enough, and a 4/3 flyer is just kind of okay. At the power level the rest of your deck presents, if you played Sublime Archangel, I would be profoundly confused and then just ignore it, because I need to be more proactive and taking out your enchantments and your artifacts, or messing with the way that you pay your life, or holding up Lightning Bolt, honestly. So Sublime Archangel is a bit bizarre to me. Archangel of Thune as well feels a little strange. These two cards feel like they belong in a go wide strategy or an infinite combo, especially with the Archangel of Thune. I guess they're both Archangels, but they just don't seem to belong in this kind of deck. If you could make a ton of creatures, I would say otherwise, but at this point, I don't understand why they're here. Likewise, Baneslayer Angel, this might be a meta call where your opponents have demons and dragons decks. And even then, this card is very vulnerable to removal these days. Don't get me wrong, I got my first Baneslayer when I was really new at Magic, and I was very, very excited to be playing with it. However, this is not that time anymore, right? 5 mana for a 5/5 flying first strike lifelink with extra protection from 2 specific creature types is just not really where you want to be. Swinging for 5, even if it gains you 5 life each turn, is really not ideal. And the fact that her natural lifelink is kind of counteracted by Whip of Erebos, not even including that, as mentioned before, things like Death Shadow, you know, don't combo well together. So at times you don't want to attack with the Baneslayer Angel because you want your life total to stay at a certain specific point. Can be clunky. I don't see it happening often, but it can be clunky. Is something at this point that there's such a high amount of mana that you're dumping into this angel that it feels kind of the wrong call. I will say, because Serra Ascendant has the same kind of lifelink clause, but I'm not speaking for them, because a 1 mana 6/6 lifelink creature is just really, really good, that I'm willing to say, yeah, that's fine. You know, it might be a nombo with Death Shadow, it might be a nombo with some of your soul transfer effects, but it doesn't matter because it's a 6/6 lifelink creature, right? For 1 mana. If your opponent's Swords to Plowshare this, you're fine. Whereas if they destroy, you know, Sarah's Angel, Baneslayer Angel, you're down quite a bit of mana, which is rather rough. All right, let's keep going. Bloodgift Demon is too much mana once again for what it does. I'm going to give you some suggestions of alternatives. I do really like Bloodgift Demon. This was a card I used to play all the time. I really like that he's a 5/4. I like the fact that it's a Phyrexian Arena, and having extra versions of this ability is always good. However, considering the rest of your deck is already very heavy on the mana cost, in this deck, it's just a little too much. If you could cheat him out into play, maybe I wouldn't feel that way, but for 5 mana, it's just a bit much for this ability. Chainer Dementia Master is a little strange to me, because though he is very, very good, he just doesn't seem to be in congruity with the rest of the deck outside of the life paying. You don't have ways to entomb your own creatures, put your own creatures into your graveyard, so you can't really set up a good board for Chainer to take advantage of. And in addition, you know, that makes it so you are playing Chainer reactively. You are holding Chainer until there is a good board and a lot of good creatures in the graveyard for Chainer to come out, stay out on the battlefield, and reanimate some creatures. And the thing is like, Chainer's main ability gets a lot better with good ETBs, right? Chainer is really, really bad at playing at value. If you use this to reanimate, like the Bloodgift Demon, that's not ideal, right? Because you have to wait an entire turn, and during that turn, if Chainer gets removed, you lose the demon, and therefore you've spent mana for nothing. Instead, you want to use this on like ETBs like Solemn Simulacrum, or I don't know, a bunch of green creatures that have good ETBs, or white creatures that draw you cards. And you don't have those, so you are reliant on your opponents. And to make it all kind of sum up, you want to be able to activate Chainer the turn he comes out, which means you need 8 mana. So this 5 mana card might as well be 8 mana. And so all of these things kind of point to me that I think it's a little too clunky for the rest of the deck. Let's keep going. Crested Sunmare is a bit weird to me. I wish you had more life gain before using this card. Maybe this is a holdover from a different version of the deck where you had more life gain, but at the moment I feel like there's just a little too few for Crested Sunmare to be good. Now, when talking about the enchantment of Sunbond, I said this was fine to use with certain cards because the ceiling was really high, whereas here, Crested Sunmare, the ceiling is always a 5/5, and I think, you know, you're not wasting Children of Korlis on a 5/5, right? So I think Sunmare either needs a little more support or doesn't really belong here quite as much. Moving on, Direfleet Ravager is perfect. This is exactly what the deck wants to do. I have no problems here. I think it's a great inclusion. Lyra Dawnbringer is, though it works with your other angels, and I do like that, and it's otherwise, you know, another Baneslayer, it is another Baneslayer. So I have the same opinion on her as I do on Baneslayer Angel, where I just don't really think this is the card you want here. It's just a little tricky, you know. Nowadays, we have methods of creating angel tokens really cheaply, and I think if that's what you want your angels, that would be the direction to go into, whereas Lyra, I think, belongs in a dedicated angel deck. Let's keep going. Vona, I think Vona's fine, even with the lifelink that she has. I think the fact that pay 7 life Vindicate is just really good. I don't love the fact that she needs to be not summoning sick, but I think she works a lot more on theme than the other cards. So I'm a lot more willing to overlook the fact that she is a little clunky. The fact that once she loses summoning sickness, she represents, you know, an attack and then an immediate Vindicate is really, really good with only a 3 life loss in between. Is really, really strong. When Vona's out and just doing work, she is incredibly powerful. So I do really like Vona here. Evra, Halcyon Witness, 4/4 lifelink. Exchange your life total with Evra, Halcyon Witness's power. I do like this. It's another life exchange card. It's got some clunkiness to it, but I don't mind it. Now, be aware that certain opponents with certain cards can really easily defeat you if you activate this ability. For example, if I had, I can't really remember the name of the card, but any card that gives -X/-X. So we're thinking about black instants and activated abilities that give, like Villas, for example. If I were to spend all my mana into Villas after you activate Evra, what that would do is, first of all, it would destroy Evra with the trigger on the stack, but it would also reduce their power to 0. And the way these activated abilities work is it's going to check Evra's last valid power, and their last power was 0, and all of a sudden you have 0 health. Now you do have Phyrexian on life, but you're not always going to have Phyrexian on life. So I'm not saying don't play Evra, because I think it works really, really well in your deck. Has a really fun interaction where if you can use your cards such as Conqueror's Flail and Grand Abolisher, allowing you to get that attack through and exchange your life totals to basically massively increase your life total, I do really, really like it, right? And then you're left with an insanely large creature for other turns. Especially, obviously, you might have thought in combo with Essence Harvest and a few other cards, Final Strike and a card I'm going to suggest, is really, really good. So I do really like it. I just wanted to note that it can be a little clunky and needs to be thought about on certain turns. Felidar Sovereign, I've already talked about. Mages of the Mirror, I've already talked about. Platinum Angel. Let's finish this off. 2 cards I'm going to say before I go to my additions. Platinum Angel. Ooh, man, I have been talking about this deck a lot. It's been 34 minutes. This is going to be a longer episode. I do really like the deck, so that's a good sign, I think. All right. Platinum Angel, I think, is too clunky here. Even though it feels like it's on theme with your deck, it's really not. Yeah, it's a copy of Phyrexian Unlife that's a lot more vulnerable to destruction, but I think the problem is that Platinum Angel just it's just too vulnerable these days. It's just not a very like safe card, but because it's an artifact, because it's a creature, it's just vulnerable to a lot of removal. And without ability to cheat it out into play or reanimate it, I really don't like Platinum Angel. So I would probably remove it. Okay, so those are my main suggestions. My main cuts or opinions on the deck. Let's talk about Children of Korlis before we go to additions. Children of Korlis is something that in a deck like this, I would heavily recommend maybe building around a little more. And what I mean by that is playing a few more. I'm not including these in my suggestions. I just wanted to bring this up. But like reanimation for it. So Feign Death effects will immediately bring back Children of Korlis once you sacrifice them. Unearth and other like low mana reanimation effects are also very good because they'll bring back Children of Korlis. And the reason I say this is there are turns that you can pull with Children of Korlis, which I think is what this deck really wants to do. And this is what I mean. Let's say you have 40 life. You spend 30 life on your commander or one of your other mana sinks, life sinks, I should say, sorry, and go down to 10 life. You sacrifice Children of Korlis, you gain 30 life. Then you reanimate Children of Korlis. Now, you could just sacrifice the children again to gain another 30 life, but instead what you can do is pay down to 10 again. Now, when you reanimate Children of Korlis, you will gain 60 life. Now, you might say, well, Curse, the math would have been the same. But this is when, if you reanimate Children of Korlis one more time, you will then gain another huge packet of 60 health on top of that. Maybe you don't even need to pay like 30, 30, 30. Is that the same 30, 30, 60? No, it's different. So you do, if you can reanimate Children of Korlis multiple times, which there are a lot of ways you can do that. There are enchantments that allow you to reanimate it every turn even. You can like skyrocket your life total incredibly fast, which can be really good for either just having that buffer, or as you know, you can spend it all into Unspeakable Symbol, which could be your life sink to begin with, and pump up your creatures to ridiculous levels. So I really do think Children of Korlis is a very strong card, and I would recommend maybe thinking of a few cards that can go along with it. All right, let's go into additions. I'm gonna try to make this a little faster because we are going quite a late in the video. So let's start with Hex Parasite. Hex Parasite. These first few cards, I should preface. These first few cards are going to be cards that aim to do things on theme that I think you would benefit from. These ones are not so much replacements, but just ideas. And then we're going to go into replacements a little while after. So Hex Parasite is another life sink. At 1 mana is a very affordable life sink. And just like your commander, brings down your life in packets of 2. Very straightforward, very fantastic card. If you're playing any form of life total manipulation, when you're manipulating your own life total, Hex Parasite is the way to be. Then, something that you can use when your life total is low that I thought would be interesting is Faith's Shield. I really like Faith's Shield. It is a card that gives you and all permanents you have protection from a color when you have 5 or less life. But every other point in the game, it just gives a card protection from one color, which nowadays isn't that good. Nowadays, we want a creature to gain protection from all colors for 1 mana, or just hexproof and indestructible. But that second ability Faith's Shield has, where you can just target one of your lands, something that's difficult to interact with, and give you and all your permanents protection from a color, which could be a fog, which could be stopping a red wrath, or stopping a bunch of removal, you're going to be really happy with. So this is kind of a fun card. Let's talk about using some of that life on 2 other things. Kurik, Son of Yawgmoth, is a 4 mana with 3 Phyrexian, so 4 mana and 6 life. Creature that allows you to turn all your black mana symbols into Phyrexian black mana. I think you'll be really happy with this. He's very strong almost all of the time, but also just gives you a direction to spend your life into while reducing the mana cost on some of your heavier black spells, which I do really like here. On a completely other direction, which solves a lot of our mana problems as well, is Bolas' Citadel. Bolas' Citadel lets you cast the spells off the top of your deck for life, which is a way of cheating cards into play, right? Your 8 or 7 or 6 mana spells are clunky, but when they're 8, 7, or 6 life, they're considerably easier to work with. All right, I'm going to put this here into removal. Let's go into a few cards that I think you should be running. These aren't, they're not all directly replacements, but they kind of fall into themes that you can use as you're taking cards out to reduce the mana cost. So let's talk about mana. Nice and easy, the first two, Talisman of Hierarchy, Felwar Stone, and now I realize you aren't playing Arcane Signet, should be the rest of your mana rocks. They are all 2 mana, we like that. It's just a lot easier to work with. I would go Arcane Signet, Talisman of Hierarchy, and then Felwar Stone. You're just going to be happier having these at 2 mana and being able to take advantage of your mana earlier in the game. Likewise, a different kind of mana, but also very important, is Lotho. I think Lotho, one, obviously that you lose life, so it's on theme, but Lotho is just fantastic. Is very cheap right now and will not keep this price forever. Just generating treasures whenever a second spell is cast is really, really nice. And even if he dies, you get to keep the treasure, so you can use that mana later in game to pull off some of your stronger spells. And also, honestly, Dark Ritual. I think your deck could benefit from Dark Ritual. Dark Ritual is a fine card that lets you cast out a number of your powerful cards a turn or 2 early. The turn 1 Necropotence or Phyrexian Arena is always really, really strong, but even just the ability to cast Repaying Kind early, cast out Toxic Deluge or other cards when you just don't have the mana for it is very, very strong. Then let's talk about card draw. So the ones I always suggest, Read the Bones. I think you'll be really happy instead of Ambition's Cost to play Read the Bones. Likewise, Sign in Blood. You're playing Night's Whisper, but you can play both if you wanted to. They are very, very good cards, and you're going to be happy with the card draw. Here's a fun one. Pain's Reward is always a card I used to love, where everyone takes turns bidding a number, which is your life you're bidding, and whoever wins the bid pays that much life and draws 4 cards. When you have way more health than anyone else because of a life exchange or because of Children of Korlis, Pain's Reward is a really fun way to not only, pick a number that no one else can pay, but in addition, reduce your life total and draw 4 cards. Yeah, so it's like Ambition's Cost, but a little better, I guess. I was trying to get the numbers. It's 4 and 3, but it's the other way around. Okay. Then, just because this card is ridiculously cheap, Dark Confidant is no longer a card I'm afraid of suggesting. At $10-ish American, you can pick him up, and he will draw you cards and lose you life. Now, like Ad Nauseam, you'll be happier when your overall curve is lower, so you'll flip less 5 mana cards, but outside of that, I think Dark Confidant is just going to do very, very well. And if you want to keep all the high cards or a second ability, Keen Duelist continues to be a card that I don't see enough of. It's just a second Dark Confidant, basically. And yes, it draws a card for your opponent as well, but with politics and your ability to judge threats, you will always be getting the best deal out of this. So rather, rather good. Then we're going to finish on removal. So something that I noticed, that most of these, okay, let's go through the ones that are just straightforward, and then I'll show you the weird ones after. So Fracture, I noticed you don't have a lot of ways to hit non-creature permanents. So Fracture is just really nice. Or I guess I'm asking you to get rid of the ones that can hit non-creature permanents. So Fracture is really nice at 2 mana for dealing with any non-creature card. And as mentioned before, Stroke of Midnight and Generous Gift destroy anything, though a Generous Gift is the only one that can hit lands, and gives them either a 3/3 or a 1/1. And you're pretty happy with that. Looking at the more fun ones and the weird ones, Dire Tactics is really interesting as it exiles a creature and then you lose life equal to the toughness unless you control a human, to which I don't believe you control very many, but I think it's just straightforwardly a 2 mana exile a creature, which is nice. Something that's stronger but clunkier is Blazing Hope, a card every time I see I really want to use. is that you exile target creature with power greater than or equal to your life total. And with your ability to manipulate your life total, you can make sure that any creature has more power. Well, almost any creature has more power than your life. And then 1 mana to exile it very, very cleanly, which is fun. It's a little win more in your deck, but it is a fun card to get to play. Then finally, the card I wanted to replace, I think it was a card with something Shadows, is Rite of Consumption. Rite of Consumption sacrifices a creature, and then you deal damage to that power to target player, and then you gain that life. This is, as mentioned before, a really good 1-2 punch with Evra. Also works with Essence Harvest, because then you can take out 2 players. Just a card that's rather good. It was Final Strike was the card that I was suggesting to replace. Now, it does sacrifice the creature, which is not free, but I think it is worth considering. And with that, I'm going to try to close up this video. Thank you so much for the deck. I really do like it. It is really hitting me. Not only is it a white-black life-based deck, but it's hitting me in the feelings of this is the kind of deck I used to play, and I have a lot of fondness for. I'm trying not to change the deck too much or adjust its power. I think to kind of wrap it up and conclude, I think you're generally going to benefit by reducing the curve. I think this deck, in order to be successful, can't be sitting around trying to choose between 5 or 6 really good spells to play on one turn. And by reducing the curve, what it'll do is enable you to play more of your lower mana spells or have fewer big plays that really do matter. It'll also just softly empower cards like Ad Nauseam, cards like Dark Confidant, that you'll just be happier to play. Otherwise, I think it's really fun. If you were to want to talk about this deck further, perhaps talk about power scaling and like what power level you want it to be, or win conditions, that's something we can do another time, but I'm hoping this kind of general overview is what you were looking for. If you'd like to send me another draft of the deck, there is a link in the video description down below. And if you would like your deck list to be the next one I make a video on, much like Shirok, you can click the link there. No matter how many times I say this, I'll never do it correctly. And then if you want to like, comment, subscribe, do the whole YouTube thing, I'd be very, very grateful. Otherwise, thank you so much for the deck, Shirok, and thank you so much for supporting the channel. It really does mean a lot. I really like what you're doing with this deck, and I would love to see more of it, so be sure to send it my way if you do any more changes. You know, I like having a deck that you work on for a really long time, because that means every few years you get a new version. All right, good luck.